The empire of Lyra was bright and peaceful. Tall glass towers touched the sky, silver bridges linked the cities, and gardens floated above quiet streets. People believed their world would never know trouble again. Princess Leora was the heart of that peace. She was known for her soft words, her calm eyes, and her wish to end every conflict without blood. The people loved her kindness. She worked every day beside her mother, Queen Helen, to keep their land safe and united. But even in bright places, shadows wait. The peace that everyone praised was weak. Far from the royal city, old enemies waited for their chance to rise again. The council that guided the queen feared that war could return. To prevent it, they asked the queen to form a bond with Earth, the ancient home of humankind. The best way, they said, was marriage. When the idea reached Leora, she only smiled. If a marriage can bring peace, she said, then let it be. The choice surprised many noble families. Some thought she would refuse. The man chosen was not a prince, not a rich official, or a decorated hero. His name was Ethan Hale, a simple man from Earth's far colonies. He'd served once as a soldier in old wars, but had left that life for quiet work as a messenger and peace envoy. When he arrived at the palace, the court gathered to watch. They expected someone proud or rough, but the man who stepped through the gates carried himself with quiet respect. His clothes were neat but plain. His hands showed the small scars of labor rather than the smoothness of wealth. He bowed deeply before the queen and then looked to Leora. His gaze was steady, not bold, not just calm. To the nobles, this man seemed too ordinary. They whispered behind fans and wine cups, laughing at the thought of their flawless princess marrying him. Leora herself did not know what to think. She had imagined someone more grand, someone who fit easily among the shining halls. Ethan spoke little. When he did, his words were simple, but they carried weight. His voice was low, patient, almost soothing. On their wedding day, the palace shone with white light. The gardens were filled with music that drifted through the air like soft rain. Guests came from every world dressed in gold and silver. Leora wore a crown made of crystal leaves, and Ethan stood beside her in a plain uniform of dark blue. They said their vows before the gathered crowds, and though the ceremony was perfect, Leora felt something she did not expect, a strange pull toward this quiet man who seemed to hide a depth she could not see. After the wedding, life in the palace changed. Ethan kept his days simple. He joined the queen at meetings, but spoke only when needed. The court learned nothing new about him. He spent his free time walking through the palace grounds, talking kindly to servants and gardeners. He repaired broken things himself, a habit that confused many nobles. Some mocked him in secret, whispering that the princess's husband behaved like a commoner. Leora tried to understand him. Sometimes she would find him on the highest balcony, watching the stars as if they carried messages only he could read. Once she asked what he thought about at night. His answer was gentle. "About people I once knew," he said. "About promises that still matter." When she asked more, he only smiled and said, "Some stories are better told after peace truly begins." She began to see that his calmness was not emptiness. It was control, the kind of stillness that hides storms beneath it. She noticed how quickly he moved when danger appeared a loose railing. A stumbling servant, a spark from the old electric lamps. His reflexes were faster than they should be for someone his age. And his eyes, though kind, sometimes held a look of memory too heavy for simple peace. The queen watched her daughter's husband with quiet interest. One evening, she said to Leora, "He is unlike any man at this court. Do you trust him?" Leora hesitated, then nodded. "I think I do, but he is not like us. There is something he keeps hidden." The queen smiled faintly. "We all hide something, my dear." As weeks passed, rumors grew. Some said he was a spy sent by Earth to control the throne. Others whispered he was running from a past filled with violence. Leora ignored such talk, but even she could not push aside her curiosity. One afternoon, while walking through the library, she found an old metal case half hidden behind books. Inside it rested a long, narrow blade wrapped in cloth. It looked ancient, the kind of weapon forgotten in this age of peace. When Ethan entered the room and saw her holding it, his face changed for the first time, soft calm, replaced by sharp concern. He took the blade gently and said, "You should not touch that. Is it yours?" she asked. He nodded. It was once. She stared at him, waiting for more, but he said nothing. He placed the weapon back into the case and locked it, then turned to her with quiet eyes. "There are things better left resting until they are needed," he said softly. That night, Leora could not sleep. She sat awake, looking at the stars beyond her window, wondering what kind of man she had married. The people believed he was ordinary. Her heart told her otherwise. And in the stillness of that night, far down the empty halls, Ethan Hale stood alone before the same window, hand resting against the lockbox that held the old blade. His face was unreadable, but his eyes held a shadow that did not belong to peace, as if he sensed that the silence around them would not last forever. The days began quietly after the wedding. The palace returned to its routine of soft music, shining halls, and long dinners filled with talk about trade and treaties. On the surface, everything remained beautiful, but underneath the calm, something was changing. Leora could feel it before she could name it. The laughter of the court sounded thinner. The smiles of the nobles seemed painted. The queen often sat in silence longer than before. Ethan woke early every morning. While others still slept, he walked through the palace corridors, silent and alert. He studied every door, every staircase. The guards had grown used to his movements, though a few whispered about him when they thought he could not hear. He carried no weapon, never raised his voice. And yet there was something about the way he moved that made the guards straighten their backs when he passed. Leora sometimes followed him at a distance. She watched how he paid attention to the smallest details, a loose tile, a light that flickered too often, a servant who came and went at odd hours. When she confronted him gently about it, he said only, "A peaceful palace still needs watching." She laughed, but deep down his words stayed with her. Rumors began to flow through the corridors like a slow, cold wind. Some of the old families whispered that Earth had sent Ethan not as a husband, but as a spy. They said he planned to control the queen through her daughter. Others claimed he carried hidden orders from a group that wanted to take over the throne. Leora ignored these stories at first, but she saw how quickly suspicion spread. People stopped trusting one another. Meetings grew shorter. Soldiers watched the gates more carefully. One evening, while the sun fell behind the towers, the queen met her daughter in the garden. "My child," she said softly, "the people talk. They are proud but frightened. The peace we built feels thin as glass. You must be careful whom you trust." Leora nodded. "Mother, do you think Ethan could ever harm us?" The queen studied her face for a long moment. "I do not think so, but mystery brings fear, and fear feeds danger." Leora wanted to believe that was all it was. But she noticed the change in Ethan, too. He started spending long hours on the balcony, staring at the night sky. Sometimes his lips moved as if he were speaking quietly to himself. Once she asked what he said to the stars. "Old prayers," he replied, "from men who never came home." "Did you fight with them?" she asked. He turned to her slowly. "Yes," he said, "but it was long ago. I left that life behind." The next week brought the first sign of real trouble. A royal envoy disappeared on his way to the city council. No one knew who was responsible. The commander of the guard called it an accident, but Ethan said nothing. When news came that 2 more officers were missing, he simply said, "It has begun." Leora was startled. "What has begun?" "The test of peace," he said. Soon after, the queen's closest advisor resigned suddenly, leaving no message. Meetings grew tense, voices sharper. Leora saw shadowed figures moving near the palace gates late at night. Still, Ethan stayed calm. He seemed to always expect each problem before it appeared. One evening, the princess returned to her room and found her husband sitting beside the window. His hands open around a small piece of metal shaped like a medal. It was old, scratched, and worn around the edges. "What is that?" she asked. He turned it in the light. "A piece of who I used to be," he said. "Someone who once thought courage could fix the world." She walked closer. "And now I know courage alone is not enough. Sometimes peace hides in silence until it is ready to stand." His words made her uneasy, though she did not know why. Later that week, during a grand dinner in honor of visiting nobles, the palace lights flickered twice. Everyone froze. It lasted only a few seconds, yet the air grew heavy. Ethan rose from his chair slowly and looked toward the main gate. "They are watching," he muttered. Leora followed his gaze but saw only servants and smiling guests. After the feast, he asked her quietly to avoid the central halls for a few days. There are cracks in the glass, he said. Let us not stand under it when it breaks. Ethan, you talk in riddles, she said with a nervous smile. Sometimes riddles are kinder than truth, he answered. She tried to rest that night but could not. Outside, she heard footsteps that did not belong to guards. A shadow passed under her door before vanishing. She was about to call for help when Ethan appeared from the darkness of the hallway. His voice was calm. Go back to bed, he said. It's only a test of the locks. But she saw a thin line of dust on his sleeve, the kind that came from the old cellar below the palace area long sealed to all visitors. The next morning, she found out that 2 guards who had been posted near the cellar were missing. Ethan did not mention it, and she did not ask. But as she looked at him, sitting quietly at breakfast, she realized that her husband was carrying knowledge he would not share yet. The sunlight that poured through the windows made the palace look as lovely as ever, but Leora could not forget the dark mark on his sleeve. Peace still smiled before the court, but she felt it tremble like a thin curtain before a coming storm. And though she still did not understand the reason, she knew that Ethan Hale stood in the center of it, calm, unreadable, and waiting. The Festival of the Twin Moons arrived, a grand night meant to show the strength of peace between the 2 worlds' rulers. The palace was brighter than ever. Huge lamps glowed in the gardens. The air smelled of sweet flowers, and the sounds of music filled every corner. People poured into the halls dressed in bright colors. Leora wore silver that shone like water. Ethan stood near her side wearing a simple coat of dark blue. He looked calm, but his eyes moved often, watching the shadows and the faces around the room. The queen spoke proudly to the guests. To peace and to new beginnings, she said. The crowd lifted their cups, and the hall filled with cheer. Leora tried to smile, but a strange feeling touched her heart. She turned toward Ethan. He was standing a step behind her, hands folded, expression still, but there was tension in his shoulders. When he caught her looking, he gave a small nod that looked almost like a warning. Then, just as the music reached its loudest note, the light above flickered once. The laughter stopped. It flickered again, and then everything went dark. For a moment, the only sound was the quiet breathing of hundreds of people. Then a blast tore through the far wall, throwing smoke and fire across the floor. Screams rose from every side. The crowd rushed toward the doors. Leora froze. She had never heard real explosions before. Her body refused to move. Before she could fall, Ethan grabbed her arm and pulled her down behind the long table. Dust and small pieces of glass rained down like sharp snow. When she looked up, Ethan's face was calm, but his eyes were sharp and cold. More blasts echoed outside. Shadows moved through the smoke-dark figures wearing masks, carrying long black weapons. They spread out, silent and sure. Ethan pressed Leora's shoulder, whispering, "Stay here." She tried to speak, but he was already moving. He pulled something from beneath his coat, a long silver sword wrapped in a thin leather covering. When the covering fell away, the metal caught the light of the burning lamps. The crowd around them gasped.
Now what?
No one had seen a man with a blade in generations. The masked attackers turned toward him, laughing as if he were nothing but a fool with an old weapon. Then he moved. He crossed the room faster than sight. The first attacker raised a weapon, but before he could fire, Ethan's sword flashed, and the man fell soundless. The next few tried to rush him together, but Ethan stepped through them like a river through stones. Each motion was simple, clean, exact. He did not shout or curse. He fought as though he had done it all his life. Leora watched from behind the table, heart pounding. She could hardly believe what she saw. The quiet man who read old books, who fixed broken lamps, now moved like a storm given shape. Every time she thought he would fall, he rose again, steady and composed. When one soldier tried to strike from behind, Ethan turned without looking and struck him down in one motion. The hall shook again, but soon the noise began to fade. One by one, the attackers fell. The few who remained ran toward the broken wall they had entered from, disappearing into the night. When the last of them was gone, silence filled the room. Smoke hung in the air. The music instruments lay shattered on the ground. People stared at Ethan in fear and awe. He stood in the center of the hall, chest heaving slightly, the sword still glowing with a dull silver light. Leora crawled from her hiding place, shaking. "Ethan," she said, voice trembling, "what did you do?" He turned to her slowly. The sharpness in his face softened again. "What I had to," he answered. He cleaned the sword with a piece of cloth and slid it back into its sheath. The motion was smooth, practiced, almost ritual. The queen was carried from her seat by guards. She looked at Ethan from across the room. "You saved her," she said, in a quiet voice. "I made a promise," Ethan answered simply. The guards rushed to lock the gates and check the wounded. Leora finally stood beside him. "You knew," she said. "You knew this would happen." "I feared it," he said, watching the broken wall. "The men behind this don't show themselves easily. Tonight was only a warning." Leora stared at the sword. "Where did you learn to fight like that? Who are you, truly?" He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Once, long ago, I led men who believed peace could be built only when the strong protected the weak. But peace became a dream, and I grew tired of war. I laid down my sword, hoping never to take it again." "Then why now?" she asked. "Because some shadows never forget to wait," he said quietly. "And tonight, they reached for you." The fires in the hall were being put out. The guests were escorted away, whispering to each other in fear and wonder. Leora saw how they looked at her husband now, not as a stranger, but as something more powerful and unknown. When the hall finally emptied, Leora and Ethan stood alone among the ruins. The moonlight shone through the broken windows. He looked tired, older, his hands still faintly shaking, though his face stayed calm. "Will there be more attacks?" she asked softly. "Yes," he said, "until they are stopped." She looked up at him, no longer seeing the simple messenger she had married. His shirt was torn, a thin line of blood cut across one sleeve. She reached out to touch it, but he shook his head gently. "There will be time later," he said. "For now we prepare." Leora nodded slowly. Around them the once bright palace smelled of smoke and dust. What began as a night of joy had turned into the beginning of something neither of them could yet name. And as Ethan Hale stood beneath the glowing moons, his sword sheathed once more. He knew that the peace he had tried to protect with silence could survive only if he faced the war he had hoped to forget. The night after the attack, the palace was silent. Smoke still clung to the walls, and guards moved through the empty halls with pale faces. The great celebration that had once been full of laughter had turned into a broken memory. Princess Leora walked beside her husband down the long corridor, unable to shake the sound of the explosions from her mind. The queen rested under guard in her private room, too weak to appear before the court. Leora had not slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the fire and the people running in fear. But most of all, she saw Ethan standing in the middle of the chaos, his sword glowing like a streak of light in the smoke. She had thought she married a simple man. Now she knew he was something more. When they reached the top of the western tower, Ethan stopped and leaned on the railing. His eyes moved across the city below them. Flames still glimmered in the distance where parts of the outer market had burned. He said nothing for a long time. Finally, Leora spoke. "You must tell me the truth now. No secrets. Who are you?" Ethan turned his head slowly. His face was calm, but his eyes looked heavier than before. "I am what they once called a vanguard captain," he said. "A soldier from the old wars." "But you told me you left that life?" she said. "I did," he answered quietly. "I left because I was tired of watching good men die for promises that others broke. I wanted peace. I thought if I could serve as a diplomat, I could still help my people without blood." Leora looked at his hands resting on the railing. They were scarred, strong, sure. "And that sword?" she asked. "It is the only thing I kept from those years," he said. "A sword forged from an old meteor that fell near our homeland. My men believed it carried our hope. When the war ended, I swore I would never draw it again." She stared at him, trying to understand. "Then why did you draw it now?" He met her gaze. "Because they forced me to. The men who attacked tonight are not rebels. They are organized. Someone inside the council is feeding them information. They knew where to strike and when. They wanted you and the queen dead." Leora covered her mouth, shocked. "But who would do such a thing? We only wanted peace." "Power makes people forget peace," Ethan said. "To some of them, the union between Earth and Lyra means losing control. They think if they remove the royal family, they can rule alone. Leora sank onto the marble bench beside the balcony. Her chest felt tight. You think the council betrayed us? Part of it, he said. Not all. There are still honest men among them, but you must trust no one for now. The wind blew softly. The city lights flickered in the distance, hiding the ruined streets beyond the palace walls. For a while, neither spoke. Then Ethan reached for her hand and held it gently. You are stronger than you think, Leora. They will try to break you, but they will fail if you stand firm. She looked up at him with tired eyes. What will you do? I will find who gave the order, he said, and I will stop them before they strike again. You mean to kill them? She asked quietly. He shook his head. I will do what must be done. Amaze cannot survive if lies rule the palace. The next morning, Ethan went to the queen. She lay weak in her bed, her voice soft but steady. You saved my daughter, she told him. Now you must save our kingdom. I will, your majesty, he said, bowing his head. Be careful, she whispered. I can see how the shadows move inside my own walls. Ethan left her chamber and began his work. He spent long hours studying guard reports and talking to the few he trusted. Worked quietly, moving like a man used to danger. In the evenings, he met with Leora in secret rooms far from the council's eyes. They spoke for hours, sharing what they had learned. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became that the attack had been planned by those close to the throne. One night, while they studied maps on a wide table, Leora said, You should have been born a king. Ethan smiled faintly. No, a king gives orders from a seat. I have always worked from the shadows, but now you protect a throne, whether you wish it or not, she said. Yes, he agreed softly, but not because of crowns, because of you. Leora felt her face warm. She turned away, pretending to fix the papers. He stood beside her, his presence steady, comforting in a way nothing else could be. As the days passed, the people of the city began to talk. They whispered of the mysterious man who saved the princess, the human with the shining sword who fought like a legend. Some called him a hero, others called him a danger. The council itself started to divide. Some supported him, others wanted him gone. While the politicians argued, Ethan prepared the palace for another attack. He trained loyal guards, built hidden escape paths, and placed watchmen in the towers. Leora joined him when she could, learning how to see what others missed. She found herself growing more confident beside him, her fear replaced by quiet strength. One evening, as they stood together on the balcony watching the dark sky, Ethan said softly, It will come again soon. What will? She asked. The storm, he said. They lost tonight, but they will not stop. The night they return, we must be ready. She took his hand. Then we face them together, she said. He looked at her for a long moment before nodding. Together, he said. Far below, the city lights flickered again, and in that faint light, Leora saw her husband's face, calm, brave, and full of quiet resolve. She no longer saw an ordinary man. She saw the defender of a kingdom, a warrior who had given his life to keep peace alive. And though the future was uncertain, she knew that nothing could shake her faith in him again. The city slept under a cold silver sky, but inside the palace no one rested. The memory of the attack still lived in every corridor. Guards kept torches burning all night. Every whisper sounded like a warning. Princess Leora stood on her balcony looking at the dark streets below. She could not see the faces of the people, only the soft lights from their homes. She wondered if they knew how close they had come to losing everything. Behind her, Ethan stepped quietly into the room. It begins soon, he said. She turned to him. You found them, didn't you? He nodded. They meet in the old marble hall beyond the river, a group of councilmen and soldiers. They plan to strike at dawn. Leora felt her heart race. Then we have to stop them. That is why I came, Ethan said. I will go there tonight with a small group of men I trust. We will end this before the sun rises. No, she said quickly. You are not going alone. His gaze softened. Leora, you can lead your people, but the fight must be mine. If something happens to you, the kingdom will fall. She stepped closer, her hand trembling slightly. And if something happens to you, what will we have left then? I will not hide while you risk your life. He looked at her for a long moment, then he sighed. Very well, but you must stay behind me. The two of them left the palace quietly through a side passage. The moon guided their way as they crossed the quiet streets with 10 trusted guards. The air smelled of dust and stone. When they reached the old marble hall, its great doors stood half open. The inside glowed faintly with firelight. They heard voices. Ethan raised a hand and the guards spread out. He entered first, his steps silent on the broken floor. Inside, the rebel leaders stood around a long table covered with maps. They were arguing. When one of them saw Ethan, he froze. "It's him," the man shouted. Chaos followed. The rebels reached for their weapons. The sound of steel echoed through the hall. Ethan moved toward them like a shadow, his sword flashing under the firelight. The guards joined the fight. Leora stayed near the doorway, her back against the wall, watching as the battle began. It was fast and brutal. The rebels were fierce, but they did not fight with unity. Ethan's strikes came quick and sure, never wasted emotion. The blade in his hand seemed almost to guide itself, its silver edge burning through the gloom. Shouts filled the air as one by one the rebels fell. Then a tall man stepped from behind a pillar, a blade in his hand and a cruel smile on his face. "You should have stayed a messenger, Hale," he said. "You were never meant for a throne." "I never wanted a throne," Ethan answered quietly. The man lunged. Their swords met in a burst of sound that rang through the empty hall. Sparks fell to the floor. They moved around the broken table, striking and blocking, neither gaining ground. The man was strong, but Ethan's calm gave him an edge. His movements were silent, measured, full of focus. With one final twist, he turned the man's strike aside and pinned him to the ground. "Tell me who gave the order," Ethan said. The man spat in anger. "You think killing me will save her? There will always be another." Ethan's eyes were cold, but his voice was calm. "Not if peace stands firm." With that, he struck the man's weapon away and ended the fight. Outside, the first light of dawn touched the river. Leora stepped forward slowly. The hall was filled with silence, except for the soft sound of water dripping from the cracks in the roof. The rebels were captured or gone. Ethan lowered his sword. Leora walked to him and placed her hand on his arm. "It's over?" she asked. "For now," he said. "But peace must be guarded every day, not just once." When they returned to the palace, the people were already gathering in the streets. Word had spread during the night. They bowed as the royal guards led the couple back inside. The queen waited for them in the main hall, pale but smiling. "Is it done?" she asked. "It is," Ethan said. "The palace is safe." Tears filled the queen's eyes. "Then my kingdom still stands because of you." Ethan shook his head. "Because of her," he said, looking at Leora. "She never gave up hope." Weeks passed. The damage to the palace was repaired. The fires in the city were put out, and life slowly found its calm again. Yet everyone knew it was a new beginning, not the end. The people spoke of Ethan as the quiet protector, the man who had drawn his sword only when the world left him no choice. Children played at pretending to be him, holding sticks like swords and promising to defend their homes. On the balcony one evening, Leora and Ethan watched the golden light spread over the city. The wind carried the voices of people singing in the streets. "They love you," she said. "They love peace," he replied. "That is better." She smiled. "Do you ever wish you had never picked up that sword again?" He was silent for a moment, then said, "No, because it showed me what peace really means. It is not silence, it is courage." The sun dipped low, turning the sky amber and red. Leora leaned her head on his shoulder. The palace below glittered like a second sunrise. For a long while, neither spoke. Then, Ethan said softly, "The world will test us again someday. When it does, we will stand as we did before together." Leora squeezed his hand. "Always together," she said. And as the city lights began to shine one by one, the sound of their people's laughter rose into the evening air. The peace that had been born out of fear and fire now settled gently over the kingdom, guarded not by walls or soldiers, but by the love and courage of two hearts that refused to yield.